What's the best way you have seen someone screw themselves over? A long while ago, in a large computer corporation with looming layoffs, an employee set up a time bomb so that a lot of files would be destroyed if he didn't reset the trigger periodically, thus creating a delayed revenge if he got fired, which eventually happened without any severance package, because the time bomb went off when he was still an employee. Story 2. I worked for one of the government agencies everyone loves. We had a donation bin in one of the visitor centers that was empty one morning. The money in the employee honor system snack room thing was gone too. It was a huge scandal. A day or two later, the cash, but not the coins, from a satellite office's employee snack money also disappeared. This was enough to get our in-house law enforcement to question everyone with access to either building. Well, only one person had a key to the donation box and a key to the satellite building. One was where he worked, and the other was in the compound where he was renting government housing. Also, there were cameras around, and he was the only one of a certain size currently employed. The guy was a strange mix of really excited to make his job his career and complaining that it did not pay enough. He ended up throwing away his dream career and receiving federal theft charges for around $100 in small bills. Story 3. Old friend from high school, Eddie, was really good at pitching and got a full-ride scholarship to play baseball at a D1 university. A week before we graduated high school, we were playing basketball in gym class. Eddie goes for a shot, misses, gets angry, punches a wall, and breaks his hand. Long story short, the D1 school took his scholarship away because his hand was ducked and he would have missed summer training. Poor guy was devastated. 10+ years later, and he still talks about how he could have been a pro player. He now operates a crane in Philly and makes really good money. Story 4. We had an employee at another location sell company merchandise on social media on his own account for 10x the original retail price. Company found out and fired employee. The very next day, the company gave every employee company-wide a decent bump in pay. So he lost his job and the pay bump, all for less than $100 reselling company merch. Truly one of the dumbest ways I've ever seen someone screw themselves over. Story 5. My answer from last time this was asked. I watched someone convince himself he had been wronged. He was an Iraq veteran and wore it like a badge on his sleeve. Any perceived slight was met with immediately declaring his veteran status and demanding special treatment. He pushed away everyone who tried to help him, kept digging himself deeper and deeper over any perceived slight, real or otherwise. Verbally assaulted those in position to save him, threw away a career, threw away a family, all over something that never even happened. He was so convinced the boogeymen were out to get him that he became his own boogeyman. We worked together, and I recall the final meeting where we all had our heads together trying to figure out how we could help him. There was so much empathy and sympathy in that room. Then he finally entered, verbal guns blazing, and all we could do was stare at him with our mouths agape. He became his own worst villain and cast his own life into ruins. I think he's a vacuum cleaner salesman in the Deep South now. Here's the story, generally. He had a company vehicle. There was something wrong with the vehicle. He reported this. The vehicle was appropriately added to the maintenance schedule for X date. He continued to report the problem, persisting every day, as is proper. Before X date could arrive, his vehicle broke down due to the oft-reported problem. He then decided that he would be blamed for the fault and that his pay would be docked for repairs. This was not the case in the slightest. He had reported the problem, recorded its persistence, and it was merely a case of the vehicle not being able to make it to X date. But he had already decided the facts and outcomes. He verbally assaulted and physically threatened the employee who was in charge of the maintenance cycle, claiming that he had been sabotaged and set up, and he deserves better treatment than this. The assaulted employee was not pushing for action. The problem was the dozens of witnesses, and that the whole altercation was caught on camera. We all merely wanted to defuse the situation and assure him that no blame was being assigned. He was the one who kept internally escalating the situation, and eventually escalated it beyond where we could do anything when he tracked down the number of and personally called the president of the company to give him a piece of his mind. Story 6. Drugs. Guy could have had it all. Beautiful GF, promising future. Wound up dead in a dirty basement. GF ended up looking like Keith Richards and may be dead also now. Even before death, they lived in squalor and wound up homeless. Just destruction from beginning to end. Don't had kicks with opiates. They are truly the devil. Story 7. I worked with a literal idiot for a union job where he just didn't think it was needed or morally okay. We tried to explain to him that the union helps him a lot more than he realized, but nope, in one ear, out the other. He had some incident and went into a meeting about it. He rebelled against the union rep, and she sat there and let him sign away his job. He thought he had finally freed himself from the union to work better, and they fired him hours later after he was no longer protected. Free healthcare, education expenses, guaranteed vacay, and sick time, assistance with housing are legal, guaranteed pay raises. Threw it all away because of religious political philosophy. Story 8. Back in college, A friend of mine tried to impress everyone at a party by showing off his fire-breathing skills. He didn't realize that the bottle he grabbed was rubbing alcohol instead of the usual lighter fluid. When he took a big swig and tried to spit it out into the flame, it caught fire way too close to his face. He ended up with singed eyebrows and a trip to the ear. The next day, he found out the whole thing was caught on video and had gone viral on our campus. It was a painful lesson in thinking twice before showing off. Story 9. They were constantly badgering me to fix something on a system I was tech support for, and I, time and time again, warned them that they shouldn't do what they were trying to do and that they should just do it the correct way to avoid their issue. After 5 weeks of hassling me, they got fed up and emailed me complaining that they'd missed a deadline for a massive client because the system didn't work, and that I'd not supported them as my job required. To make their point, they CC'd in many people. Their boss, my boss, their team, my team, their VP of operations, my VP, you get the idea. I drafted my response, redrafted several times, then replied. I attached every single one of their abusive emails, my professional responses explaining clearly that the issue is theirs and that they should correct it to make it work. It's the only time I've made sure I did reply all. I'm not overly sure of the fallout for them, but they were very quiet for at least 18 months before I heard from them again. Story 10. I was waiting in a lobby once for a meeting room my work had booked to interview a possible new remote hire. While I was in the waiting room, a guy showed up, then sat next to me and proceeded to brag about getting a new job that he was underqualified for, and that he lied on his resume about college, work experience, etc. He was talking like he was some hotshot finance bro saying to a stranger at a business center at like 10 a.m. that he was going right from there to the strip club to celebrate. Guess who I was there to interview? He was drastically unqualified, unable to tell me the meaning of the 3-letter acronym that the job was, and that he supposedly had 10 years experience in. During the meeting, I called a referral location he claimed he worked, but with the number I had not the one he listed, and they had never heard of him. He thought he already had the job after a few interviews, but unfortunately, I was the veto. The offer was pulled after we looked into his resume that had somehow not been checked. If he had kept his mouth shut and done some homework on the job, he might have slipped through and gotten at least a few paychecks. Story 11. Had this lab partner in college that was preemed. While rushing for a frat, he wasn't allowed to sleep for a month, among other ridiculous things. He basically slept through all of his classes and ended up having to switch majors to something less academically demanding in order to survive rushing for his frat. Story 12. My ex-wife. She had an eye put out when she was 12. She got a $250K insurance settlement. Some of that money was put into mutual funds. I opened a business while we were married. At one point, cash flow was very slim, and we borrowed several $1,000s from her mutual funds. We didn't put it back over the remainder of our marriage. When she filed for divorce, I told her I was going to pay it back. She said I didn't have to, but I insisted I was going to. We fought over how we were going to settle everything for months, mainly because her attorney saw a cash cow in her and kept her stirred up. Every time we would come to an agreement, she would take it to him and he would talk her out of it. Eventually, I told her in lieu of me paying her back the cash for the mutual funds, she could have my half of the equity in the house. She jumped all over that. She wound up getting about 1/4 of the money we borrowed from the mutual funds in the end. Story 13. Recently, a 20-year employee lost his management job because he couldn't keep it in his pants. There was a blow-up at work with him and a pregnant young lady. Yep, his second with that young lady. Funny thing, it wasn't the only woman he'd had relations and children with at work. And not the second either. Pregnant young lady went to HR, and he was gone before lunch. Story 14. When my wife was married to her first husband, her second childbirth ended badly, with both her and her baby needing to be resuscitated. Daughter has lifelong medical issues, and both ended up with financial compensation. Husband became distant and ended up breaking up 2 households. Wife sued for divorce, and he dragged it out, aiming to get some of her settlement. Enough time elapsed that she became fully vested in his retirement plan, and he got none of the settlement. Story 15. When I was first starting as a pharmacy tech, CVS, where I worked, would give out gift cards to patients if they switched their prescriptions over to us. One technician was caught making bogus gift cards and taking them. She was brought into the office, and they told her, "We know what you did, but you'll be in less trouble if you tell us first." She copped to stealing Vicodin, a lot of Vicodin. This was before it was a narcotic and was just a regular control and out on our shelves. She foot-keyed up bad lol. Story 16. My dad was such a notorious hothead within his department that when someone he'd openly criticized died abruptly, one of his colleagues floated the idea that maybe professor, our last name, killed him, which the police then took seriously as it became a rumor among the faculty and later students. So then, rather than be like, okay, I had nothing to do with this, how can I help? My dad refused to cooperate, wasted a lot of people's time, and acted like such a douche that he was basically given the rest of the year off. I don't really know how that works in academia when someone has tenure, but yeah. And then, rather than take that time to reflect, he was just like, oh, woe is me, none of my behavior could have possibly put me in this position. Story 17. During the dot-com boom, my employer's stock price was riding high and we were all millionaires. On paper, you only got the riches if you exercised and sold your stock options. With the stock price going higher every day, exercising and selling you options today would feel like a loss tomorrow. This caused people to make all sorts of bad decisions. One that stands out for me is a coworker who bought an enormous house. Instead of exercising and selling his options to pay for it all, which he could have done, paid the minimum down payment and took out a mortgage for the rest. Then he would exercise and sell just enough options every month to cover the monthly payment. Cue the dot-com bust. Our stock options quickly became worthless. My coworker had no money to cover the mortgage payments and lost his house. Story 18. I did some work in 2008 involving a lingering lawsuit regarding AOL, yes, America Online, and some computer hardware manufacturers. The core lawsuit had long been over, but this was a shareholder derivative suit that just wouldn't die. We had to read documents, emails, early-stage PowerPoint presentations, aka slide decks, and other stuff related to AOL. I saw one presentation that has stuck with me for almost 15 years titled Internet Search Companies. The slide deck was from 1999-ish during AOL's heyday. The idea was that internet search companies were starting to become popular, and AOL wanted to acquire one. It went through all the players and discussed their methods, strengths, and weaknesses. Think Ask Jeeves, AltaVista, Excite, Lycos, etc. The slide for Google was hilarious. It said they used a complex algorithm to return results from a structured data set that it created from the public web. The conclusion, not expected to be a major player in internet search. I've never forgotten that. The slide even had a price tag for potential acquisition, which I think was around $5, 10 million. AOL completely fumbling the moment. Story 19. In the early 2000s, I had a coworker/roommate lose $11K at the casino. He won $15K the night before, walked in with $100, walked out with $11K and some change after taxes, then proceeded to lose it the following day like a dumbass. His GF was furious. We worked for near minimum wage, so that was a huge win for him. It gets worse. I didn't know he was going to leave $10K with me to go blow $1K plus without any guilt, but I was taking too long to come back after going out with my GF, so he took the whole amount and blew it on roulette. We even went to look at a new washer at Sears, but because they didn't have a driver to deliver it, he decided to wait a couple of days to go back and buy it. No new washer for us, friggin' idiot. Cherry on top, the night he went with a $100 was going to be his last night gambling. Allegedly, he was going to add his name and info to the self-exclusion program. But since he won big, he thought he could do it again, so he put that on hold. Few months go by and his gambling is getting worse to the point he's always late on rent and asking to borrow money. His GEP finally had enough and gave him an ultimatum: add yourself to the self-excluding program or they breaking up. He agreed with the condition that she adds herself too. She agreed since she wasn't really into gambling. Guess what this maffer did? Waited for her to register. Then he got cold feet, changed his mind, and they broke up over it. Later on, I found out he had been blaming me of stealing money from his GF's purse, like I'm the one with a gambling addiction. It's like watching a series of unfortunate events. I wouldn't laugh if this was happenstance, but no, this was self-inflicted. Story 20. I had a boss that regularly would take all of the credit for things me and my team members would work on. We work in special event and large event venue planning. Well, we had one of the largest events in my career pop up. Spent months planning, budgets, negotiations, contacts, the works. He came into maybe 5 meetings in the months we spent planning. Long story short, we had a few major slips that caused a huge loss on the client's end. Mind you, we made them whole in the long run. He got all the credit. Poetic justice IMO. Story 21. My father was all tough and loved getting into fights with people. He was proud of himself and his muscles, all steroids. And people would genuinely be more scared of his attitude than his looks. He also had guns at home. My country doesn't allow it, so that was a big deal. So, around the block, when he would get into an argument with someone, he loved going home and getting the gun to scare whoever he was arguing with. People were generally scared of him, so he wouldn't end up getting in trouble or anything, unfortunately. Well, one day he got into an argument with this guy who parked in front of his house, but on the other side of the road, where the guy was allowed to park. My father was shouting at the guy, telling him to take the car out of that spot because it would disturb my father's illegal way to park his car. The guy didn't want to. My father went inside his house, got the gun, and came outside to threaten the guy. The guy decided to leave, but he didn't go home. He went straight to the police and gave them the exact address of someone who threatened him with a gun. The police showed up at my father's house an hour later and found 3 guns. My father got arrested and spent the night at the police station, and my grandpa had to bail him out or he would go to jail the day after. The prison system in my country is not that good, and normally if it's your first instance, you get off of it pretty easily, but when you have your first instance, you really don't want to get a second. And now my father is scared of everything because a small argument while driving could land him in jail if someone decides to call the police. Story 22. Friend worked at a gas station midnight shift, got drunk, wanted to steal beer, borrowed car from garage, but picked one that had yet to be fixed. Car broke down on busy road. As he was walking back to the gas station, he realized he left work keys in the locked broken car. The approaching police arrived just in time to see him smashing out the car windows with a rock. Story 23. Gym teacher got busted banging a 15-year-old student. He was found guilty and sentenced 6 to 30 years. He later appealed, claiming that some error in the sentencing process gave him more time than it should have. He won the appeal, and a resentencing was scheduled. But before that happened, it came to light that he was still contacting the girl by secretly passing messages to her. He'd give the letters to a family member, who then left it in a drop spot for the girl to pick up. Because of that, they ended up giving him an even longer sentence. Story 24. I sell phones for a large retailer of a phone carrier in a relatively small town. One of our standing policies is no cash for devices and no prepaid credit cards. This is all to combat fraud. One night several years ago, a customer came into the store 10 minutes before close, fraud tactic 1, to buy new iPhone Maxes on a new account. Before we even start, I let him know about the payment policy for phones. We go through the process, and with the information he provided, he's approved. We get through the process, and at the very end, the credit card he gives me doesn't have the funds on to cover the taxes of the devices. It was like less than $20. He immediately tries to pull out cash, and I reiterate, no cash. Now he starts delaying, tactic 2, saying he's waiting for someone to put money in his account. It's now 35 minutes after closing time. Next, he says his girl is going to give him a new credit card I can punch in. If we can't see the card, we don't accept it for obvious reasons. By this point, it's more than obvious what's going on, and I give him an opportunity to pay properly, or he can come back the next to finish paying. Now he's getting loud and belligerent. Tactic 3. I inform him it's time to leave. He refuses for a good 15 minutes. I tell him time to leave or I'm calling the police. He responds, call them. I want to talk to them too. We go back to that small town part. He watches me call them. An officer happened to be on the street next to the store. He sits for a good 5 minutes yelling until he finally gets up to leave. Takes a minute to figure out how unlock the door I'd locked 50 minutes ago at closing and runs directly into the police officers. I stood inside, so I didn't get much of what happened outside, but they later told me he was totally uncooperative and whatever he said or did lead them to searching him. They found a bunch of drugs on him and several IDs with his photo and different names on them. So he was arrested. When the cops asked why he wouldn't leave, he said he wanted the money back he paid with, the $20 or so, which, for the record, was refunded the moment he was led away and the whole thing was canceled. Story 25. I know somebody who cheated on her husband of 15 years this spring and thought she would do it a few months and then go back to her marriage like nothing happened. Her husband found out after less than a month, left her and moved out. She can't afford their house anymore, and both kids refuse to live with her. Oh, and she lost her job last week. Story 26. I used to be a manager at a pretty major craft brewery turned pub. Stopped brewing at that location and they made it a restaurant. The general manager I worked with was one of the horrid people I've ever met. Little man syndrome to the T. Discounted everyone else's opinion. Lazy, know-it-all, callous, one-upper, mansplainer, Kexist. Never stepped up, ever. Anyway, the facility had a really bad pest problem. I remember the first couple of weeks training, a table had a gigantic roach in their food. The GM made me deal with the issue. Fine, whatever. That's my job. But he scoffed at me when I told him I was going to comp their entire bill and buy them a couple of 6-packs. He said our comps would be too high. After COVID shut down for a couple months, the pests went from bad to worse. Like really bad. A few of us notified him of mice in the building, and he laughed and said, "You think those are bad? You should have seen the huge rats we used to have." He also stopped pest services because he said no company could come during the right times. I believe he just wanted to keep our costs low. Several of the other managers and I would purchase our own pest bait and bait the restaurant. One time I walked in the day after I baited and found hundreds of dead roaches everywhere, and we all cleaned up the restaurant on our own accord. Mofo GM was there before us that morning and didn't even acknowledge the dead roaches, nor our work we had done. Multiple calls to the health department and nothing ever happened. I don't know how. Eventually, it got so bad that roaches and mice were running around during business hours. Mice ran across the dining room, one ran up a bartender's leg, one fell in the fryer, one got stuck in the pizza oven. And that's just a few instances. I had quit by this time, and many of us wrote letters to the owner about how horrible this GM was, but again, nothing ever happened. Finally, by some miracle, the health department came in and actually did something. Shut the place down for several weeks, made the local news, and the owner finally came to his senses and fired the GM. I was just so happy to see that douchebag gone, and his name be associated with the slight downfall of the restaurant. It was sad to see that place deteriorate like it did. It made a comeback and is still in operation. Story 27. Came to realize I screwed myself bad a few years after this occurred. Left stable job for a small local company, working at support. Was nice, only driving a few minutes to work. After 7 months or so, I started noticing layoffs. This is a small company, so it was odd and they fired the CFO. I asked my boss who was a good guy if me being the new person had anything to worry about. He said no. And if our department was asked to let someone go, it would not be me in a department with under 12 people. Made me feel better, but I was the one literally disabling their accounts. Skip to me being a idiot. I was helping one of the senior leaders with a random ID issue. He seemed nice enough and approachable. My mistake may have been shutting his office door, then without thinking asking, "What the hell is going on around here?" He gave a sort of "not sure what you mean" type of response and did a nervous way of saying, "Don't worry about it." Okay, cool. Thanks, Saya around. A week later, I was called into her with my boss, CO, and the gal who onboarded me. CO kicked it off, saying this isn't going to be a good meeting. Proceeded to tell me I'd be let go from the company. Shocked, I looked at my boss. He looked down. My only reply was, "I left a stable job and just got here." They handled it well and respectfully. CIO even offered a personal apology about the situation if he would have known. Said I can use next 2 weeks to look for a job and even said I didn't need to even come in and could do the 2 weeks at home. Drove home, called wife, then called previous job. They said, hell yeah, come back. So wasn't a huge issue. Skip to earlier this year, I had a moment where things all made sense. That leader who I shut the door on and somewhat cornered him in his office had me fired. After a few months, the local company was purchased by a Japanese parent company for 200+ million. Noticed on LinkedIn that leader is SVP. Moral of the story is be careful how candid you are around people in leadership roles. The end. Story 28, knew a girl that got her dream job as a federal scientist. She celebrated that night with her friends at a local bar and unfortunately decided to drive herself home a little too early. She got pulled over and her blood alcohol level was just slightly over the legal limit. She spent a day in jail, lost her new job, and became a cautionary tale. She moved out of town shortly after due to the embarrassment. I hope she is doing well, but she cut contact with all her friends after she moved to Florida. Story 29, my now ex-mother-in-law, the absolute worst person I've ever known. She inherited about $500,000 about 15 years ago. Then, she retired in her 40s just because she felt like it. Keep in mind that she, had zero money saved. The inheritance was the only money she had. She had lived paycheck to paycheck before the windfall. She was not married, so she didn't have a husband's future retirement income to fall back on. Before she retired in her 40s. She had worked at a relatively low-paying job that did not pay into Social Security, so she would not be entitled to Social Security when she reached 65. Was and still is an impulsive, know-it-all spendaholic sociopath addicted to opioids and Xanax, which she doctor shopped for. These pills must have cost her a fortune. I'd seen her down several at a time. When she inherited the $500K, my then-husband repeatedly told her that since it was the most money she'd ever have in her life, she needed to be extremely careful with her spending. Talk to a financial planner, get help for her pill addiction, etc. He had this talk with her so many times, but she blew it off because she apparently knew better. Fast forward to circa 2011. She spent all of the inheritance. Completely gone in, like 3 years. Invested. Saved none of it. Bought a house that she sold at a substantial loss 2 years later. Just blew the money on crap and, of course, lots and lots of pills for her addiction. Now it's 2024. She lives in a dumpy apartment in a bad area of town, gets a small income and rent subsidy from the state. No car, no friends, no family. My ex barely speaks to her and lives in another state. She's in poor health, no doubt in part due to her pill addiction. Relies on food banks. Hates the world, is bitter, and her situation is everyone else's fault, in her eyes. I live maybe 20 minutes away, but haven't seen or talked to her in years. It's a shame because if she hadn't been such an unholy to me all these years, I'd maybe help her out once in a while, but I'm not going to. Oh well. Story 30. My ex-wife always identified as pankexual. When she finally got moderately successful in her highly competitive industry, her ego went berserk, and she used the old, tried and true, I'm suddenly a lesbian excuse to cheat, leave our marriage, and mostly escape the consequences from our mutual friends. I say mostly because her sudden massive ego explosion caused her to get fired from her job. Story 31. My ex-wife was so excited to go screw other guys that she didn't think at all about how she would feed herself, where she would live. Within a couple weeks of her saying she wanted a divorce and living her best life via online dating, I drafted up a contract saying I would get the house, my retirement account, my pension, the paid-off car, sole custody of our child, no alimony to her, and she would pay me child support. To be clear, this wasn't a case of her not knowing what she was signing. I made sure she understood all of it. She was just rose-colored glasses about what an incredible new life she was going to live. Who needs anything from the old life when the new life will be so much better? Turns out guys don't want her for long now that she's obsessed and pushing 40 instead of the cute little 20-something she was when we married. She thought that was the life she was going back to. It hasn't been. Meanwhile, she can't hold down a job and her parents had to buy her silverware because she lived off of me for so long that she had no concept of how to survive on her own. I don't rub it in, but I also don't bail her out. She made informed decisions. It's not my fault she was living in a fantasy land. Story 32. Used to work as a house matron in a UK boarding school. where there was a team of 4 ladies who cleaned the house I was in charge of. 3 had been there for years and were great. And then there was, let's call her T, who'd been hired as a replacement for a lady who'd moved out of the area. T was lazy, unmotivated, called in sick frequently, and had to be micromanaged to get any work out of her at all. I complained to HR, who basically told me to suck it up because it was hard to get cleaners who could work the hours the school required. T reported that her father had died and that she had to go halfway across the country to clear out his house. The following day was my day off, and I went into a nearby town to have lunch and run some errands. As I was sitting outside Starbucks with a coffee, who should emerge from the shop opposite me, laden down with shopping bags and laughing with a group of friends. But T, the look on her face when she spotted me was classic deer in the headlights material. She was called into work the following morning and fired on the spot. Story 33, started dating a guy I was really into. We had great chemistry and compatibility, and after a few weeks, we would talk and see each other almost daily. Told me he couldn't believe it took him this long to find me. Finally got to the point we were going to have keks, and first he apologized for having a skinny dick and only 5 inches. His words. Told him it's fine, I don't care about that. Then he had a hard time getting it up and apologized for being really nervous. Told him it's fine, it happens, and ended up just finishing him off with a BJ. Next day I find out he blocked me. No word or warning, nothing. Bruh, I would have done anything for this man. I liked him so much I was already thinking about marrying him, lol. Oh well. Story 34. When I was a teenager in the 90 AS, I worked for. He was the manager in a warehouse where I worked. One of his duties was to perform an audit of the electronics cage. The cage was a literal caged closet where electronics were stored, as they were high value and easily stolen. A logbook was maintained to record any time something was put into or taken out of the cage. My child molester boss was lazy, so he regularly didn't do the audit. One day he'd gone out on a delivery when the store manager came back to the warehouse. He'd gotten complaints from corporate about the lack of audits. He just wanted to get the audit checked off his list. So he grabbed the nearest trustworthy employees, me and a teenage salesman, gave us the keys to the cage and the log, and told us to go do the audit. It was a simple matter of verifying that the things signed out of the log matched tickets for customer pickup delivery. Almost immediately, we found huge discrepancies. Not only had a bunch of stuff left without delivery pickup tickets, the missing stuff had all been signed out immediately before or after another item that had been delivered by our boss to a customer's home, which wasn't a thing that would normally happen. He'd been ordering in items for stock, logging them into the cage, then logging them back out under bogus delivery tickets when he would take a legitimate delivery out. He'd load both items in the truck, deliver one item, and steal the other. This was the 90 AS, so there weren't robust back-end systems to catch this. It was all pen and paper logs and receipts. So if he'd performed the audit, it would have been trivial to make it look like everything was legit. Anyway, we reported what we'd found to the store manager. He called the cops. The cops searched my boss's house and found a schmittload of stolen VCRs and a bunch of child prawn. The guy's in his 50s now and got sentenced to 45 years in the federal pen for more kitty prawn stuff. Story 35. I know a guy that literally ducked himself out of his yearly bonus. Our yearly bonuses were heavily dependent on attendance, and a guy I worked with always used as many days as he could before getting in trouble. It was the last day of the quarter or whatever, and he missed work after having used all his days. I was talking to him at work later that week, and he was having bedroom boom with his lady friend, and he was repositioning or something, and his foot slipped and hit his footboard, and he broke his big toe pretty bad. He missed a couple days of work, and because he did, his bonus was asterisk thousands, asterisk of dollars less than it would have been. He started using his days less often after that. Story 36. Incels and femcels. Letting one aspect of life, romantic relationships, keks, ruin the rest of their life because they obsess over it to their own failing, and then in turn, hating the people they desire so much, driving a weirder, harder wedge there. But honestly, anyone resisting what life throws at them. Story 37. My brother knows a guy who was in med school with him. This guy was rich, white, and raised in a small town because his rich parents wanted privacy. He's never had to work hard for anything in his life and wrote his parents' money into med school. Being that kind of person with very limited outside experience, he was pretty misogynic and racist. He made some comments at his school that got him in trouble. He got worse and got expelled. He went behind his parents' back and got the family lawyer to officially sue the school. The case was so easily won by the school. Now, he can never go to med school, has a bachelor's in a degree that's only really helpful for advancing to med school. Cherry on top is that he was homeschooled by his parents, and he was mostly nice to them, so they didn't realize how racist he was. and his punishment was that he got cut off from his parents' money. In 2 months, he went from promising med student living in a mansion with a $20,000 credit limit credit card that he didn't have to pay off and took international trips almost every month, to what my brother heard of him last, a minimum wage fast food worker living with random roommates in a shady part of town. Apparently, it's really hard to get a job when your only previous work experience was getting a degree and your name is in the news for being a racist. Story 38. The CEO of Sticker Mule recently sent out a mass email to the entire customer base over his support for Trump after the attempted assassination. The email preached love for all. After this, the sticker company lost users, followers, and Sticker Mule's Instagram was flooded with comments that pointed people to alternate sticker companies. So, morale of the story, no one wants to hear your political stance from a random email from a sticker company. Keep it to yourself. Story 39. I have 2 I can relate. 1, foster brother called Crime Stoppers above an armed robbery to try to claim the reward, an armed robbery he had been part of. He drove the car. When the police picked up the other 2, they promptly rolled over on him. He had priors and was last one nabbed, so he caught a longer sentence than they did. 2, wife's ex molested his daughter and niece, recorded the whole thing and tried to sell the footage on the clear net, caught extremely quickly, thankfully. I think his buyer was a cop. He did 5 years of a 9-year sentence before getting parole. Being a Keeks offender, there were lots of carefully explained restrictions covering his parole period. Stay away from places kids are is an obvious one, as is no internet use except for monitored email for job hunting while in the halfway house. He bought a Wii U and pestered the other residents for the Wi-Fi password so he could connect to the Nintendo eShop and Miiverse. As soon as the house matron heard, the cops were called and he went back to finish his sentence. Story 40. In a former job of mine, there's an initial period of probation you go through for several months. It's sort of the early out situation that if your skills aren't up to snuff or your personality is not a good fit, they can just choose not to fully hire you and off you go. In effect, any reason they want can be used not to keep you, but if you make it past the probation, then they need a real reason to fire you after that. So anyway, some new guy got hired, made his way through probation, and on the last day, he'd been told he passed with flying colors. As it happened, that evening was one of the semi-frequent work parties, and of course there was some celebration for him and some other probation people. And in the middle of beers, he chimes in with something akin to the following. Guy, it's awesome that finally I can stop walking on eggshells all the time. I don't have to pretend anymore. Coworker, asterisk, expecting he's going to admit to something like being gay or whatever, asterisk, oh, we're a welcoming group around here. Guy, well, that's just it. It's great and all, but I do think you all go too far. No offense. But a woman's place is in the kitchen, not at a real job. Plus, now I know it's some sort of affirmative action type Schmidt. But I think you probably could have hired fewer colored people. We are trying to make a quality product after all. Room. On Monday, he was informed that he had not, in fact, passed probation. Story 41. Pretty tame one here. My cousin struggled through high school and survived a suicide attempt. Decided to straighten up and worked hard through college. His mom slaved away to pay for his tuition because he didn't want to take out loans. Got a job right after graduation at a pharmacy making $30/HR. He quit 3 weeks later because it wasn't in his field, and he didn't like dealing with customers. 3 years later, he's unemployed and has quit looking for a job altogether. He spends his days sleeping and his nights drinking with friends. He gets an allowance from his younger sister and lives with his aging mom. A 3-year employment gap will scare away any potential employer. The suicide attempt disqualifies him from any good career fields in the military. He's basically screwed career-wise. Story 42. I was at my best friend's house when she brought over a plenty of fish date. They went to, and while she was going down on him, she saw some blisters. When she said something to him about it, he said that they had always been there and it was normal. Well, she came out of the room to ask me if I thought it could be herpes. I told her it definitely was. He was lying, and she needed to kick his ass out. Instead, she went and had keeks with him in the shower with no condom. To absolutely nobody's surprise, she gave herself herpes. I have no idea what she was thinking, but I had zero sympathy for her. I was never rude to her about it, and I never said, I told you so, but I definitely was not a guest of her pity party either. Story 43. Steve was a founding software engineer at a startup I worked at. We were getting word that we were going to get acquired by a much larger company. All we had to do was keep doing what we were doing, and we'd make a ton of cash, especially him. Then one day, Steve climbed the wall of the men's restroom into the ceiling and crawled over to the women's restroom. He crashed through the ceiling while somebody was in there, pants and underwear around his ankles. Man, that day was bonkers. The cops were called and everything. It became this huge ordeal, of course. He was immediately fired and charges were pressed. Sensitivity meetings were had, etc. About a month later, we were acquired. Best day of my life, TBH. I looked into how much Steve lost out on, and he was looking to make $50 million easy, possibly more. Now the guy is living with his parents trying to hold a job. Every time he gets one, he gets let go after an anonymous call to the company gives them the story. I happen to know this cuz I know who is making those calls. Story 44. My friends were going *8 blocks * from my dorm to a house near campus. They had a DD who messed up a yield on a 5-way that the city kept downtown as an excuse to pull people over. Everyone but the DD is drunk and underage. The cop asks if anyone in the car has been drinking, and our Mensa candidate, who we specifically did not let talk to police, thought he was being funny because we always had to tell him to "STFU" to police was like, "Watch this." Then he rolls down his window to let the beer smell out and says, "We're good." The cop makes everyone blow and writes 3 tickets. Lets the driver off about the yield. Then the Mensa candidate blames the driver for getting stopped and not getting a ticket. Tries to say he should pay the fines. He's not in the group chat anymore. Story 45. This just recently happened, and the final outcome is still in the air. My wife's friend had just recently broken up with her now ex-fiancé since he was getting verbally abusive and was also arrested for theft. He had a mental breakdown and stole a wind chime from someone's yard. The guy also stacked additional charges for fighting the cops at the police station. He was released, grabbed a few things, then went Mia leaving her to move all their stuff out of their apartment since the lease was up. He also drained all the bank accounts and locked all the credit cards since he was in control of finances. Luckily, the guy actually left behind Pokemon collectibles that were worthy probably tens of thousands of dollars. So she took them with her after we convinced her it would be a good idea to keep them as collateral. This wasn't the most valuable and rare of his collection, but still significant. I've been told his full collection is worth $400-600K. His job is trading collectibles in the stock market. They finally reconnected, and for whatever reason, she gave it back. All of it. She said that she trusted him, that he was able to give her a little bit of her money so she can put a deposit down on a new place. But as soon as he got it all back, gone. Mia all over again. How did she not see that coming? I just don't understand some people. Story 46. Had 2 business partners where my name and face was the brand of the company. The company was named after me, and I was the one with all the ingredients and recipes. One got greedy and convinced the other person, his ex, which they had a good relationship, that they no longer needed me, but also needed me. The contract was in another language I couldn't read because we were in a different country. He said, "Hey, don't you trust me? I'd never screw you over." I was naive and young and signed the document. Found out after I signed my shares away to him and lost my percentage. So I left the company and watched the multiple locations fall apart and laughed in the process. Also, to compete, I started my own company solo and named it similar and just took all my existing clients with me. It was a feel-good moment. Story 47. My mate was into people sleeping with wife. Was his thing. They seemed to like it and get along great as a couple. You would never have picked them as the type. Until he kept encouraging her to sleep with this one guy and even go away for a weekend. Fast forward, friend and his wife are now divorced and she is happily married to the other guy. Story 48. I've been in some of the most cutthroat environments ever, so I've seen some pretty horrendous, for instance. When I was an intern at AF50 Company, my fellow interns were goddaughters of the CSO, son of the chief of staff, etc. Those were the types of people I've been surrounded by my entire life. Stuck up, drug addict, alcoholic, party freak. The girl I know is the daughter of a celebrity from the 90s/00s, living in luxury since she was a child. Had a $9,000 month condo when she was only 12, lived alone. She ran the high school because her mom funded almost 50% of the school's funding. She got so addicted to drugs, her really gorgeous looks turned into Schmidt when she became 21. Like she lost most of her hair, super thinned out. Her facial structure is bad, etc. It's horrifying. As much as I hated her, I admit she was gorgeous thanks to her mother's celebrity looks. All of that is gone now. She was going to be a celebrity since the start. Her mom paved the way for her since she was 3. She did a few TV shows and has now disappeared. Story 49. A baseball writer came to the paper where I used to work and lasted 2.5 days. In that time, he asked his happily married father of a new baby, boss, if he was sleeping with one of the interns because if not, he wanted a crack at her. Since she so obviously needed this nobody so badly, used profanity in the press box, where people were doing live radio broadcasts across FCC-regulated airwaves in the conservative southern U.S., and showed up for his first day of work unshowered after spending the morning starting to unpack. That's not how he screwed himself over. After 2.5 days, he told the new boss, "I don't think this is working." A new boss asked, "Really, Haas? You think so?" His new coworkers were more than happy to help him repack his Schmidt, load it into the moving van, and see him gone. That's also not how he screwed himself over. 6 weeks later, he applied for a job at another newspaper in the chain, and he listed the sports editor at my paper as a reference. When they called to ask, "What can you tell us about this guy? Like, why did he only last a few days?" Believe me, his short-time boss was very happy to completely illuminate the facts about this fine young man. That's screwing yourself over. Story 50. I still think about her sometimes. I was 18, she was 16. We worked together. She had dropped out of HS already, claims of drama, and guys always stalk me. I saw a couple of her friends come in, say hi, get some food, and leave, and that's what he defined as stalking. A normal dude stopping by a fast food place where a cute girl he knew from school works. I was trying to convince her to go back to school. She was agreeing. I was talking to her about setting boundaries. She shouldn't giggle and laugh and talk to a guy if she thinks he's creepy. I was teaching her how to nicely tell people she's not interested. I honestly felt like I was making a little progress with her. And then she told management she was pregnant via another coworker. Seems he worked her over in other ways. Dude was 24 and already had 2 kids with 2 different women. Congrats on the third. She was asking management what to do because the week prior she started dating this white kid and slept with him. But our coworker was black. She was wanting to tell her boyfriend it was his. But management explained it to her. "Girl, your baby's gonna be half black. He's gonna know." Story 51. Was in court for a traffic violation waiting my turn. They bring out a line of people who were in the local jail. As each person is about to see the judge, the prosecutor, or maybe it was their defense attorney, goes and speaks to them and basically says plead guilty and the prosecution will request a smaller sentence. For instance, I remember one was picked up on shoplifting and they said they would recommend some sort of class and some community service if they plead guilty. The key was they had to plead guilty. One particular defendant got the same offer and he seemed all too happy to accept. When he made it before the judge, the pivotal question was asked, "How do you plead?" This poor individual proudly exclaimed, "Not guilty." The judge, without missing a beat, said to take him back to jail to await trial. This guy realized his mistake almost instantly and tried to backtrack, saying he didn't understand what had happened, but they were already bringing the next person up, and the judge was ignoring him. He probably just sat in jail for one more night, but I think of this unfortunate individual often. Story 52. I was in court fighting a speed camera ticket. The judge gave instructions at the beginning of the session. He said there were a lot of cases to get through, and if we told him we weren't driving when they called our names, he would have to dismiss the case. So we needed to be ready to say that if we weren't driving, so he could get through everyone quickly. Everyone seemed to understand the assignment, and it went quickly as people stood up, said they weren't driving. The judge dismissed the case, and the clerk called the next name. This continued until one guy wouldn't say he wasn't driving and also wouldn't say he was. He wanted to plead the fifth and argue with the judge. The judge eventually asked the guy if he was on drugs or had something wrong with him, then found him guilty and issued a fine. The rest of us just sat there shaking our heads and wondering how the guy could be so stupid. Story 53. I have a friend who frequently goes on his phone at work. Oftentimes I'll be on Discord with him and think that he is at home. We will be making our usual very appropriate jokes, and he'll say, "1 sec, I got a customer." And then we will hear him talking to the customer. He's constantly on his phone, and apparently there has been an ongoing issue at his several different jobs he has worked at over the past couple years where the safe register is short at the end of his shift and keeps being unjustly fired for it being off a little bit. While it is normal for a register to be short a couple bucks sometimes, for it to be off a couple hundred and only during his shift is a little different. I'm surprised he hasn't been arrested. It's always someone else screwing up his register, or him getting in trouble for being on his phone one time, or whatever else. He also says, "Besides, I always get all of my work done." Sure you do. You definitely don't get distracted and goof off at work. Story 54. Had a friend that was in his 40s decide to pick up a painkiller habit. Went from being a married father of 2 kids who owned a house in Los Angeles to divorced, seeing his kids maybe once a year, and renting in New Mexico after not being able to hold a job. Guy could build a car from the ground up too. It's a shame. Story 55. I had a supervisor who did not like me, yelled at me in front of colleagues numerous times, and generally tried to make my life miserable while at work. At one point several years into this, we had a big meeting with various professionals we worked with closely, and that supervisor told them all a story about a time she believed was successful with a client. Unfortunately, she used the hard N word while telling this story. She was demoted and forced to personally apologize to everyone. Story 56. My aunt, mother's brother's wife, comes from a family which is frankly very conservative and has this "the man is always right" attitude, even when the men are being stupid. So my aunt's brother and his wife moved to the UK a decade or so ago and were looking for flats. While they're not poor, they're incredibly thrifty for the wrong reasons. After seeing a bunch of flats, they decided to live in a show flat that they saw because it came all fitted out, and they thought they wouldn't have to buy their own things because it already came fully furnished. No one in the family told them it was a stupid idea because he's a man. He has to be right. Cue constant noise from traffic on the nearby freeway, missing items, e.g. kitchen stuff, because it obviously isn't actually a functioning flat, it's just for show. Lots of wear and tear, No gas pipeline or working toilets, and poorly furnished rooms, but the idiots had already paid for it so they couldn't move El Mao. Story 57, my ex-husband. I offered to pay all his bills indefinitely, even buy him a house if he would just move out and leave me alone. I asked for 50% of our joint investments, and I would support him financially for as long as he needed. I was also primary carer. He spent the next few months abusing and punishing me to the point I had to leave my well-paying job and became homeless. 2 years on, I have majority custody, and am taking most of his super as well as over 50% of assets while he's destroyed his credit rating, has multiple police reports against him. His relationship with the kids is damaged AF, and he's just become a crap person in general. He could have had it so easy. Story 58. I used to frequent a few of the Reddit sports betting subs. They're overall not great IMO. And about once a week, you'd see a post from someone who claimed they'd found an oversight with the markets the books have, and that they could place a couple of bets such that they wouldn't lose. It was almost always the case that they themselves had missed something crucial, which led to them having a fair chunk of change at risk. The most common one was people betting on soccer games and tournaments, thinking that they could bet on side A to win with one book, and side B to win with another book. And because in the final stages of tournaments, a team will end up qualifying, that one of their markets would be guaranteed to win. These clever folks didn't realize that those win-draw-win markets are based on regular time only, so don't include extra time or penalties, meaning that draws were asterisk, definitely asterisk possible. Story 59. A friend wanted to buy into a rare muscle car project that I was working on and getting ready to sell as a project. He said that he would buy in, and we'll finish the project together and make more money. We didn't have a written contract, and he's pulled crap before, so when he took possession of the car, what he got was a shell. He starts off by not putting in writing that I would be able to make anything for my labor. I took the option of finishing it and selling it. He denied me access to work on it and sued for the rest of the parts. He lied in court and I won the parts. He tried to screw me over and ended up screwing himself over. The parts are very, very expensive. He doesn't have the skills to work on it and didn't know what needed to be finished. All he had was a shell. Serves him right for screwing someone over. Story 60. Demanding a ticket from a park ranger. In Way State National Parks, you have to have a Discover Pass in your vehicle. $30 for an annual pass. We were in a park shooting in an approved place when a ranger comes up to see if we had passes, etc. I showed him mine, and he moves on to my friend who didn't have a pass, before the ranger can start to write a ticket or give a warning. Another guy that was shooting marches up in all his Tacticool gear and says, "I don't have a pass. You'll have to give me a ticket." The ranger bid us a good day and started writing up the stranger. Story 61. This was back in the early 80s. My next-door neighbor had a 75 Bonneville station wagon in perfect condition. He was in a bad mood and got in the wagon to go to the store. It wouldn't start, and he got more pissed and yelled, "If someone offered $50 for this thing, I'd take it." An old man walking down the street heard him and pulled $50 out of his wallet. Neighbor ran in the house and got the pink and signed it. The old guy got in, turned the key, got out, and walked away. Came back with a can of gas. Story 62. A guy with an advanced degree who was basically a contract employee. He complained that the job was beneath him, and he has these big plans to do other things. He took a lot of days off and didn't have a good attitude. After all of his big plans failed, someone else got promoted, and he was furious about this. A different full-time employee left, and he laid down an ultimatum that they take him on full-time or he would quit. He suddenly wanted this job that he had always considered beneath him and showed little care for. They didn't hire him. He left. His replacements were much better. Story 63. I worked with a guy that complained nonstop about PPL working on the production floor. I asked him if he'd ever gone out and actually talked to the people messing up inventory to see if he could help. Crickets. He never intended on trying to fix his problem. Just keep complaining nonstop. Anyways, a few months after I started, he called in on a Friday morning saying he quit and wouldn't be coming in anymore. He took a job as a warehouse manager in a different state sight unseen. Sure enough, he was back in town about 4 months later. The job was a bust, and he was asking around to see if he could get his old job back. Boss basically said, "Get off, you left without any thought and left us in the dust. We will do the same to you." Story 64. An agency in the Dewey, old school guy who was nice enough but just did not get how computers and email work. We explained everything you do on your computer and email can be tracked. He had a prawn problem. While it is now 1 strike and you are out, at the time it was a 3-strike deal. His 3rd strike, printing out a photo of a topless woman and not immediately getting it from the printer tray so that someone else got it, and just looked at the print path on the bottom of the page with his username on it. Guy was just a few years from a federal retirement and boom out the door. It was so stupid, and we warned him and explained to him that you can't look at prawn on a government computer. Story 65. During the entry to boot camp, you have to go through medical processing. This guy I flew there with and knew a little bit from during meetings at our recruiter's office had also been assigned to my division. And on the second day at boot camp, started freaking out and told us all he was going to refuse shots and just get sent home. When the time came for us to all get our shots, he refused and was pulled aside only to leave us and get transferred to separations. The thing nobody tells you about boot camp is, it's not that simple to just give up and go home. People are held there for many, many months as they go through the separation process from the military. It is highly likely I graduated boot camp before he ever left. Story 66. I have a boss, and as of now, she just ran off over half the staff by doing one thing. So my boss and one of my now ex-coworker never could agree on anything. And since they both have anger issues, they would always scream and butt heads with each other. So last week, they were arguing and he bent down to get something she threw on the ground, and then she did something so degrading to anyone, but especially him. She put her finger down his butt crack and then tried to stick it in, but he was able to stand before that could happen. Next thing I knew him, and over half the staff walked out and haven't been back since. Story 67. Installing an internet connection at a new subscriber's house today. I installed the dish on the roof and went inside to do the programming. Came back out, and my coworker, who constantly tries to pack up early at every single job, had put the ladder away, and I needed to go back up onto the roof to fine-tune the dish alignment. So he had to get his ladder back down off the van and bring it back over to the house with the tools. Every time, every day. He never learns. Wastes 10 minutes packing up, only to have to unpack stuff again when something comes up, about 50% of the time. I tell him just to wait until I say I have finished, and then he can pack up, but he won't wait. Story 68. Friend who is very challenged takes up with a woman from Africa who messages him on Facebook. We warn him it doesn't look right. Scammy. He marries her after meeting her in person once. Sells his affordable home in small town to buy a large fixer-upper in Seattle for my wife to turn into a senior group home. He gives up a Cush school district job to move to Seattle. Along the way, they never lived together, and he pays for a lawyer to get her green card on track to become a citizen. On the one vacation, they take together to a remote small town. Of all things, she runs into a man from her village in Africa, and off she goes to the friend's room for the evening. How do you think this turned out for this knuckled-headed friend? Story 69. Classmate of mine at university was in the running for top graduate based on grades. He was found to have cheated on his last final exam. He was expelled, and since it was a military academy, he had to serve as an enlisted member of the military for several years. Lost his degree, military officer career, and had to tell his parents and grandparents just days before graduation that he would not graduate. Story 70. At work, our president was having a meeting, and some people were gathering in the room for the meeting. The marketing manager lady that worked directly for him was there, and one of the service VPs was trying to get some papers ready and asked the marketing lady if she could make a few copies of them for him, and she's like, "Shh, I don't work for you," and walked off. Well, the meeting was for the president to announce that he was retiring and promoting the service VP guy to president. So yeah, she didn't last long after that, LOL. She didn't last. Story 71. Worked with a guy that kept calling in sick and then getting seen out doing things you wouldn't be doing if you were at home sick. After the second time in 3 months, they fired him, only for his mom to come into the restaurant and try to lie for him, even though she was seen with him both times. They had a super weird relationship. The job is incredibly understanding about taking off for personal health reasons and doesn't ask questions if you only call in from time to time. Getting seen out buying furniture and beer at Walmart when you called in an hour ago was spectacularly hilarious. Story 72. Someone called in sick to work one day. She actually had a job interview. It went well. She told everyone at work that she was leaving to join the police. She had a very arrogant attitude about it. They eventually called my boss for a reference saying, we had redacted in for an interview on *date*, and she interviewed very well and would like a reference. She called in sick that day. She didn't get the job. My workplace always allowed time off for interviews too. She would have got it no problem if she'd asked. She always had exactly the kind of mentality that shouldn't have any authority over others. Story 73. A friend of my parents back in the 1970s was riding shotgun in a Corvette, sprawled back in her seat with her right leg hanging over the rolled-down passenger window. The driver swerved to avoid a dog, and the passenger side clipped a road sign. She lost her leg from the knee down, but M saved her from bleeding out. Somehow she was smart enough to wear a seatbelt, or maybe the driver made her, despite putting her leg outside a moving vehicle. So it didn't completely crash her life, but it did make it significantly more difficult. Story 74. I worked in a place that stored credit card info in not-so-secure ways. Normal for the times, but very easily stolen info. My coworker used a client's credit card to order himself a pizza. He had the pizza delivered to our work, on camera, and was the only person working that particular shift. He was caught, fired, and had a mark on his record over a pizza. Story 75. Worked for a wine company that had some provocative label photos. Nude women photographed waist up from the back. Employee found unused/uncropped photos in a marketing file and posted them on a social media site as his new girlfriend. Another employee who followed him made us aware. We demanded he remove and erase the photos from his phone and then walked him out the door. Story 76. I had a friend who chose to believe people on the internet over his IRL friends, thinking the internet people were better friends than we were. He happened to see an email about an intervention I was planning for him because I was careless and left that email tab open. He had a lot of mental issues that were connected to a forum those internet friends hung out on. He ended up going to those people to tell them what I did and how terrible of a person I was. They ended up telling him to pound sand. He now has neither set of friends. Story 77. Not a big or impactful way, but as a cashier, I've seen many people that act like they're in a huge ass hurry and switch lines just for the line they move to close right before they get there. My store didn't give a schmidt, so they had to go to another line again. Not too often I feel it's deserved, but some regulars need to be less regular. Story 78. My friend's son had a lucrative position with a cybersecurity firm 20 years ago. He got in on the ground floor and was making $50K plus as basically a computer CSI, and had a very promising career ahead. He and two of his work buddies didn't get along with a certain manager and thought it was a good idea to create a secret chat where they talked massive schmidt on this person, as well as other members of the management team. Predictably, they were caught and all promptly fired. He went on to work in restaurants and developed a lifelong meth and coke habit and has been in and out of jail. Story 79. Me. I brought in my best friend to work with me because she was down on her luck. As soon as she got in, she started flirting with the senior manager, got credit for my work, and got the promotion I worked 4 years to get. First thing she did in her new role was to fire me, before I could prove she stole my work presumably. Now I'm unemployed and pretty much down to my last few $100s. Story 80. Started a new project at work with a PM from out of state. First meeting, he decides to show what a tough guy he is by picking on one of the lower ranks, and chooses me. What he doesn't know is that he is the only newcomer on this project. In my case in particular, I'd been seconding between teams for the last few months, so was fairly good friends with almost all of the people there. I left the project and watched the revolt happen. People stayed, but that guy is universally hated now. Story 81. I watched my best friend progressively make worse and worse financial decisions while ignoring mine and other friends' advice constantly. I realized soon after that our friendship was a one-way street and I was sick of walking his way. Had to end it there. One of the hardest things I've done, but needed to be done. Still struggling with that. Not sure if this is as bad as others, but it is the worst I've seen someone screw themselves over and over and over. Story 82. Well, on Saturday at about 6 p.m., a person I know well climbed drunk from the deck of a bridge to the top of the bridge supports and fell down onto the road platform. He has a broken pelvis, back, arm, shoulder, and a brain bleed, and has been in a medically induced coma since. The kicker is his son was filming him and caught it all on video. I don't want to see the video. Story 83. My cousin wanted the day off work, so he put salt water in his drinks bottle, chugged it at work, and was sick. His manager, while saying about sending him home, was encouraging him to sip his water as it would help. Every sip made him chunder again. Finally got home and was then genuinely too sick to go do whatever he wanted to get off work for. Story 84. First semester of uni, we had group PowerPoint presentations for a course in lieu of final exams. Being both on time and within allotted time was heavily emphasized. Anyway, one group chose to do the words slowly fly in one at a time style of PowerPoint and didn't even get to page 2 of their presentation. They didn't pass the final. Story 85. A friend of mine was a cop. Decided he wasn't making enough money. Started selling Fugazi jewelry online as real deal and got busted. Scammed just enough money to be considered a felony. Lost everything. All the time getting through the academy, making rank, pension, recession-proof job, poof, gone. Story 86. An ex bragged, WTF, that she stole my money, and years after I dumped her, her friends casually told me that it's what she's known for now. That's just weird behavior. It's like another friend who was bragging about spitting into someone's food for being rude to her when she was working in a restaurant.